Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Justin Weiss. I'm the Director General and the founder of the Paris Peace Forum. And at each edition, I insist with my staff that, yes, I should moderate one session that I care about. And the issue I care the most about this year is this issue of equal access to AI that we've been working on for a number of years at the forum. We started in 2020 when we gathered a group from experts on AI from the Global South, with support from Leminate and Martin in particular, and had a group of about 30 experts from Latin America, Africa, and Asia. And we've been working since then. And so it's not the first time we're tackling AI. On the contrary, you may remember, for those who were there, the session a year ago, which marked the first anniversary of the sort of ChatGPT moment, and we're now at the second year of that. We've been fostering multi-actor discussion and multi-actor work since 2018, and we'd like to do the same thing for equal access to AI. Today is also about 1 year after the Bletchley Park Summit on AI governance. More to the point, for our subject this afternoon, it's 2 months after UNGA, after the General Assembly of the UN, which was marked by quite some deep work on digital issues, with the Global Digital Compact and the high-level advisory board on AI that Secretary General Guterres convened and that gave its conclusions. Indeed, we have several members or authors of that report here today. And today is also 3 months before, exactly 3 months before the AI Action Summit, which will be on the 10th and 11th of February 2025, and organized by the French government in Paris. And maybe some of you heard Anne Bouvreau earlier this afternoon in a discussion with our president, André Gouria. And what we did to contribute to that summit was both in terms of bringing a project. We had this call for projects that probably some of you have heard about. We had more than 770 applications, and so they will be showcased during the summit in February, and also in terms of policy, trying to advance that question of equal access. How do we leverage AI for the benefit of all mankind? How do we create more of a level playing field among countries? And it's north-south, but it's also other countries that don't have the same level of access to AI. And lastly, how do we build a viable AI governance architecture? What type of network, what type of mechanism, what type of institution should we build for this? The HLAB report read, we should be putting a floor under the AI divide. And my friend Jan Bremer boasted that that was his line. I don't think it's a very good metaphor, but you know, let's take it as it is and work on that issue. We have a fantastic panel today. We have lots of very qualified people to address the issue. So many qualified people that we've divided this session into 2 shifts or 2 panels. During the first one, we will hear from Foreign Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, as well as perspectives from the Global South, for lack of a better word, from the ground, from entrepreneurs who are deeply invested in AI and can tell us about the realities of that, as well as from the institutions. Amandit Singh Gill will be with us. He's the UN Special Envoy on Tech, and then be the architect of the work by the UN that I mentioned, but also a testimony from Vilas Dhar and a view to the AI Action Summit with Martin Tisnet. Then, during the second shift, we will do a deeper dive into what works, what doesn't work, and how we should prepare for this, with views from philanthropy and from business, and I would say views from sort of the from a more realistic perspective on this, and obviously how we can go about creating this mechanism or institution. So let me now call on stage the first shift with Minister Barrot and the first speakers. Mr. Barrot, can you sit here? Kate, can you sit here? Karim, can you sit here? Yes, Martin. And Martin, can you sit here? Yes, thank you. A brief word of introduction for Minister Jean-Noël Barrot, even if he doesn't need one. I think it's a very unique situation in which you are, Jean-Noël, because before being foreign minister, you were Minister of Digital Affairs for France. And so Minister Barrot brings to his new job overseeing French diplomacy the depth and expertise of tech specialists. And so without further ado, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Justin. Hello to all my co-panelists. Great pleasure to be here at the Paris Peace Forum talking about this new digital revolution, generative AI. This is just a new wave of technology, and so the best way to think about how to address it is to try and draw the lessons from the past. And in my view, there are three collective failures that we've made in addressing the previous wave of digital transformation or digital revolution. And by learning about these three failures, we can address this new wave in a more appropriate way, in a way that would benefit to the entire world, whether you're from the north, the south, the east, or the west. What are these three failures? The first one is the lack of competition. The second one is the lack of inclusion. The third one is the lack of focus on human rights, I would say. So let me start with the lack of competition. We have not seen in many of the tech-related industries the speed at which concentration can happen. Why? Because at first, as we saw large companies growing in the tech area, we interpreted it as the necessity to scale in order to deliver more effective, more efficient products. And this was probably true to a certain extent. But what we've seen eventually in certain sectors of tech is the emergence of major players that are able or in a position to act as monopolies. And they're so big and they're so powerful that they create a disruption to what's very key to us, meaning the functioning of the state and sometimes democracy. How should we deal with this first failure in this new era with generative AI? Well, by being super focused on a competition policy and by ensuring that as AI develops, as generative AI develops all along the sort of the value chain, we don't let once again big monopolies develop that will stifle innovation and that will generate a number of issues that we'll have the hardest time dealing with 10 or 15 years down the road. That's for the first failure. The second failure, I said, is the lack of inclusion. And it's true along the sort of global divide, but this is also true in countries of the West or the North or whatever you want to call it. Take France, for instance. We've used digital as a way to, quote unquote, simplify the life of our co-citizens. So what we've done is take our red tape, our sort of paperwork that were very tedious, and basically turn them into PDFs and put them online. And we said, oh, this is great. Digital is going to allow us to include more people in society, to facilitate the access of citizens to public services. But the opposite happened. By making complex processes digital, we made them even more complex for a huge chunk of the French population. It is estimated today that there is 1/3 of the French population that feels it is at a distance from digital, and that experiences even more difficulties in accessing their rights and public services than used to be the case before the digital revolution. And I'm not talking about generative AI. I'm talking about the very first wave of digital transformation. And of course, the same applies to the digital divide across the world. By empowering perhaps the richest countries, because it was not set up in a way that is shared with developing countries, the digital transformation has probably deepened the divide between rich countries and poorer countries. So how do we deal with this second failure, the failure of inclusion? Well, we ensure that we set up the mechanisms in order to make sure that the key resources that we need for generative AI are shared appropriately across the globe. And those three key resources is expertise, data, and computing power. And so these three things need to be shared so that everyone can access them and everyone can benefit from this revolution. And within societies like France, well, rather than doing the things the way we did it the last time around, we start from the situation of those that are the underprivileged, that have the hardest time accessing their rights and public services, and we ask how generative AI and their great promises can be turned into a tool to empower them in order for them to take the most out of this revolution. Third failure, after the failure of competition and the failure of inclusion, is the failure of human rights. So there's been a lot of discussions about privacy in the digital space, and we've made progress with regulation. Europe has perhaps gone even one step too far by implementing very harsh regulation that are good for privacy, but that have tended to stifle innovation somehow. But there are other things that have not been treated, and I want to cite one of them, which is the protection of children online. This is a country of 70 million people here in France. In this country, it is forbidden to expose children to pornography. If you go around this building showing pornographic images to children, you face prison time. Yet, in this country, there are 2 million children every month that are exposed to pornographic content online. And those that are exposing the children to pornographic content, not like you, they are not sentenced, they are not charged for their responsibility of breaking the law. And so in this new technological era, the era of generative AI, whether it's about what's happening in France or the rest of the world, we need to make sure that those new technologies are not going to be used in a way that circumvents the fundamental rights of human beings. And that requires a lot of scrutiny, that requires a lot of research. But fortunately, we have a great moment, the next summit for action in AI that will take place in February in Paris. We have great people, some of whom are on the stage right now, and we have great ideas in order to make sure that this new technological revolution, this AI revolution, is put at the service of human beings and equally shared across the globe.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. And we'll go straight now to a view from the South, from Kate Callott. Kate, you are the founder and CEO of Amini AI, which is a leading African startup building the data infrastructure for Africa. And suffice is to say that you have a number of titles that I will just summarize by saying you were named Time 100 Most Influential People in AI, World Economic Forum Tech Pioneer, and One Young World Entrepreneur of the Year 2024. So with a good introduction like that, I'd like you to tell us more of a view from the ground and from entrepreneurs about the challenges and the opportunities of AI entrepreneurship and what we need especially from the AI Action Summit in February.
Sounds good. Thank you for having me today again. I think for me, having the perspective of having been in big tech and working in the US at companies like NVIDIA and then deciding to move from New York City to Nairobi to build something from the ground up on the continent, I got a big reality check. My dream was to build an AI company in Africa. And when I landed in Nairobi, I actually realized that Africa is the most data scarce continent, and that data scarcity is affecting many of the different segments and industries where you would take data for granted here. So we didn't start by saying we're going to build a data infrastructure company. We thought, what is the biggest pain point we can solve for the developers, for the startups, and for the rest of our continent with the outsized impact that we can have in Africa, and that was focusing on the data infrastructure. So at the core, we aggregate large amount of environmental data, and it's powering sectors such as mining, energy, and agriculture. And then I call it the easy part. We actually also build our own models in-house. When it comes to the challenges that we've seen, data has been one. The second one has been around access to compute. Within our company, we've been extremely fortunate to have partnerships with some of the biggest compute companies in the world, which have equipped us with the necessary compute infrastructure that we needed in-house to be able to build our models. But you have to realize that not many of us on the continent actually have this chance. So we've had to also partner with the ecosystem. We're working with research institutions in Kenya and outside to also provide them access to those compute resources, but we have to do more. On top of compute, I think there is one misconception today that the talent in Africa when it comes to data science, machine learning, and AI doesn't exist or is not there. There is no AI innovation on the continent. That misconception is wrong. You have brilliant developers, brilliant data scientists, machine learning practitioners that are today on the continent and are actually the ones driving AI innovation. It's not an innovation that comes from big tech. It's not an innovation that comes from policymakers. It's actually an innovation that comes bottoms up, from the ground, from those startups, from those communities that are congregating, meeting at hackathons, boot camps, and actually solving challenges on a daily and weekly basis. Challenges that are relevant for their countries and their communities. So now once you have the data, you have the compute, you have the talent and the research, well, sky is the limit. So for me, if I have a recommendation or a couple of recommendations as we are moving towards the AI Action Summit in Paris in February, it would be to get those ecosystem actors in the room. Because the face that builds AI on the continent is not usually the ones who have a seat at the table. And I think the summit has the opportunity to do things differently than other AI summits and other meetings that have been organized over the past couple of years, is to actually make sure that you put in the room the people who are really driving the innovation in those countries. And usually they're not the policymakers. The second one is really making sure that policymakers understand deeply the opportunities and the challenges of that technology. You have to make sure that there is some capacity building, some capacity transfer that happens at the policy level. Because before, building critical infrastructure meant building a road, building a hospital. Today, actually, building critical infrastructure also means building the necessary compute infrastructure for developers to be able to develop themselves in their countries. So making sure that policymakers are a catalyst and an enabler for those communities become extremely critical when you're thinking about AI. And then when you have the compute infrastructure, the data, and you're enabling the talent, this is when we will truly see the potential of AI transforming all our economies, whether it's in Africa and other emerging countries.
Thank you, Kate. That was very refreshing and very precise also in terms of preparing the AI summit in February. Karim, let me turn to you. Karim Beguir is the co-founder and CEO of AI company InstaDeep, which was acquired last year by BioNTech. which we know well from COVID times. You know, Karim, help companies and leaders come to grips with the latest AI technology. And so you not only have this experience, bringing this experience of InstaDeep, but also of advising many others. So I would ask the same question as I asked to Kate. Seen from the ground, what are the challenges, the specific challenges, what is necessary, and what is the best things we could do during the AI Action Summit?
Absolutely. And first, thank you, Justin, and the organization of the Paris Peace Forum. It's a real honor to be with you today. And I wanted to say, I mean, this question of the digital divide or AI divide or between, you know, like Africa and developed countries, it's a very personal one for me. I am actually half French, half Tunisian. I was born in France, moved to planet Tatooine, Star Wars, in southern Tunisia at age 1, grew up in Tunisia, and so this is really personal for me. And after studies at École Polytechnique in France and then in the US, I wanted to come back and help. And what was obvious to me at the time was that people were misunderstanding or like were not properly evaluating the opportunity of developing deep tech and AI innovation in Africa. So I co-founded InstaDeep 10 years ago with literally 2 laptops and 2,000 euros. And the idea was, let's prove to the world that young Africans can actually innovate in AI, can do things as well as DeepMind and other tech leaders. At the time, this was considered crazy. Like, people told me, like, you are out of your mind. You will come begging for a job a few years later. Well, incredibly, actually, if we fast forward to today, we actually managed to publish an innovative research, including with DeepMind. We were the only startup in the world to publish joint AI research with DeepMind. Later on, Google AI invested in InstaDeep during our 100 million Series B, and ultimately we were acquired by BioNTech Group last year. And so, really, like, I want to share a message of optimism. This is possible, and I can tell you that because I've seen it in action. If you had told me at the time that this was possible, I would have said, well, maybe this is like an optimistic scenario, you know. But still, I wanted to try to see what we could do with an African talent force working with colleagues hand in hand in Europe and in the world. And today it's a reality. At InstaDeep, we have 400 talents. We have a large presence in Paris with the largest, one of the 3 largest employers of AI talent in Paris today. And we're also the leading African AI startup. So what I would recommend, coming back to your question, in terms of like, where is the real divide? I mean, we often talk about data, and I think Kate and Amini AI are doing amazing work on data. I'm not that worried about data. I think this will be solved. What I'm really worried about, like the #1 concern, is infrastructure. Because we are now in a phase, and I'm actually an AI researcher, so I'm passionate about these things. We're in a phase where the access to compute is going to be critical. So let me tell you how you should look at a data center. A data center, basically, it's like having a city of super smart, Nobel Prize level workers working day and night for you, for your projects. And so if we don't have this in Africa, there's going to be a significant issue, and the continent will not be able to develop like it should. That, for me, is the real digital divide. Obviously, we also need to work on education. This is critical. But I am optimistic that this can be done if, like Kate said, we actually empower the private sector, the people who are on the ground, the startups that are building ecosystems in Africa, building bridges between Africa and Europe. I actually believe this is possible. But it's nevertheless critical. Why? Because today, when we think about AI, we think about LLMs, large language models, generative AI, but this is soon going to shift to this notion of agents. Those super smart, Nobel Prize level workers that could work on anything, that will be accessible in the data centers. And so really we need to educate the workforce if we want to bridge this digital divide on how to use efficiently those agents. It will be like having your smart digital colleagues working with you not replacing you, but amplifying your productivity. And so this is extremely important for Africa, but it is also extremely important for Europe, because if we have a prosperous Africa, if we have next generation green compute energy data centers in Northern Africa, for example, feeding into large cities, Naples, Rome, Marseille, and others, then it will be actually a win-win for everybody involved. And I think this kind of future is actually possible if we work together, and we have the AI Action Summit coming very soon, so this is the opportunity. So my message is, it's actually possible to build extraordinary win-win collaborations between Africa and the developing world, between Africa and Europe. And at InstaDeep, we're super excited about this and looking forward to contributing at the next AI Action Summit. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Karim. So what I hear from the two of you is the need for infrastructure to remedy data scarcity in the South, the need for compute power, that's the most sort of obvious thing that we all know about, the need to educate policymakers, the need for more education to AI in general. So how do we collectively answer this? And I'm not saying that you're not answering this, on the contrary, you're at the front line of providing this. But how does the international community organize itself to provide this? And to answer this question, I'd like to turn to Amandeep Singh Gill, who's really the AI czar, I would say, at the UN. Well, no, he will not like this description. So I would say his true title is UN Secretary General's Envoy on Technology, a job that you've held since June 2022, bringing an experience both in tech and in diplomacy. And so very, very simply, Amandeep, where are we in terms of UN work? What have been the results of UNGA and, of course, of the H-Lab on AI, the H-Lab panel on AI that you were part of, and what does this mean for the AI Action Summit of February?
Thank you very much for those kind words, Justin, and it's a great pleasure to be here in Paris. I think we are in a very good place. The Summit of the Future resulted in the Pact for the Future being adopted, and as part of that, the Global Digital Compact. And in the Global Digital Compact, nested inside are some critical decisions on AI governance, which are a first for humanity. So I was thinking about the minister's remarks. You know, we have to tackle these issues from broader perspectives of the political economy, from the perspective of international cooperation, peace and security. We are at the Paris Peace Forum, but also the question of human rights and human-centeredness. So the Global Digital Compact provides us with this anchoring for AI work. You know, the last thing we should do is deal with AI as a silo apart from data governance, digital public infrastructure, human rights, trust and safety online, and the essential problems of connectivity, meaningful connectivity and infrastructure that Kate and Karim have pointed out. Now, moving to what's coming next, just last week on Friday, the President of the General Assembly appointed Spain, Costa Rica as the facilitators for deciding the mandate and the modalities of the International Independent Scientific Panel on AI, which has been decided by the summit. This is the IPCC equivalent, but iterating at a faster pace. And I think this addresses a critical issue, which is lack of evidence, lack of information, lack of knowledge for not only policymakers, but the AI actors themselves. What are the capabilities? How should we be thinking about those capabilities? What do they imply for both opportunities and risks? The second area that Spain and Costa Rica would help us take forward, hopefully very quickly, is a policy dialogue on AI governance. We need different parts of the world to come together on a platform, an inclusive platform such as the UN, to talk about their governance approaches so we can build interoperability, build shared understandings, common vocabulary, and the work on governance is anchored in our shared norms, the UN Charter, the human rights treaties, decisions on gender, environment, and so on. And then on capacity building, there is a decision to ask the Secretary General to come back with options for innovative financing of capacity development. All these critical enablers, compute, data, talent, and the basis on which AI work happens, digital public infrastructure, would require investment. So how do we match the demand and the supply? How do we take forward in a more collaborative, less fragmented manner, capacity building to improve not only access to benefits, but also agency over the development of AI? I think that's a critical question that the SG has been asked to reflect on and come back. And this is where I'll close by mentioning the importance of the Action Summit in February. I think we have a critical catalyzation of political will that's happening, going back to the Bletchley Park, the Seoul Summit, and now with President Macron taking the lead to bring leaders together in a comprehensive way so that we can address various aspects of the AI challenge. And they're looking forward to what Martha and the team will do, and ready to support this work from New York in the context of the decisions at the Summit of the Future. Thank you.
Thank you, Amandeep. And I think we're going to continue on this institution. I just have a personal message for Minister Barrot. I think you have an emergency waiting for you. Call your office, as they say in English. And so I'm afraid you'll have to leave the stage right now. But thank you for your introduction. And we're going to continue on that question of institution with a testimony. Right next to Amandeep is Vilas Dhar. Vilas Dhar is the president and trustee of the Patrick J. McGovern Foundation. And the foundation oversees the initiatives that leverage AI for an equitable world. But what I'd like to ask him today is more about his experience in the UN system, and especially in the H-Lab, since Vilas has had these functions on top of being an OECD expert on the issue and also being the US-nominated expert at JPI, at the Global Partnership on AI. So could you tell us the view from, I would say, the panel of experts on AI, and what you would recommend for the AI Action Summit in February?
Wonderful. Thank you, Jashan. I've been saying that this day has been so amazing. It's a party for good friends, people who come from so many sectors but have shared alignment around the future of AI, and it's been a delight. I will say, I'm going to speak briefly, and I'm not going to use the term AI very often, despite all of the introductions you've given. I instead want to tell you the story of this farmer I met recently who shared with me that this year he forecasts having a crop that'll be worth about $350. And if he could get about $400 for it, he'd have enough money to send his daughter for school fees. A miner that I spoke to in South America who shared with me that he's deeply concerned about the safety of what he's doing, and he really wishes there was a technology that could help him make his very hard job slightly safer. The villagers who talked to me about how the elephants get drunk in the forest by eating fermented fruit and come and run through their fields and damage an entire crop. These are stories that are pretty far away from this room. And yet, to me, these are the stories we should be talking about when we think about the future of AI. The AI divide isn't a metaphor that we can speak about in the ideological views of here's how we might address it through policy. It's the stories of real people on this planet who face real problems. And the kind of AI that solves those problems for them are not often the trillions of parameters and the billions of dollars held tightly by a few institutions, but rather the mechanisms by which we create a technology infrastructure that's not merely to us or for us, but is by us. What I think we learned in this work that we did under Amandeep's great curation in the high-level advisory body was to realize that the stories of technology too often are reduced to easy, emotionally resonant narratives. They get picked up and continued. They have a virality to them. We have to take pause. We have to understand that the effects and the impacts of the decisions we make have real, consequential, meaningful, short-term outcomes on people. So how do we address this? Well, I think two things that have come through in all of our work. The first is, you know me, and I think many in the room do, an optimism about the idea that if we were able to name the right values, the right principles, the right norms, the right ideals, we might actually be able to take control of something that feels like a runaway train and instead put it back on the right tracks, the tracks that take us to a future that's actually centered in human rights, in dignity, in equity, in a spirit and a vision of what AI might look like. But ideals by themselves don't solve any problems, right? So the second part of that is, how do you turn ideals into institutions? What are the kinds of real frameworks we have to put in place in deep and collaborative partnerships, not merely by voluntary commitments or by state regulation, but by a collaborative process that weaves these threads together into a single tapestry? It strikes me that the conversation we should have is not how do we merely increase the availability of data or invest in talents and skilling. There's a space for a public conversation in the moment about what is the soul of an AI-enabled future? Who participates, who owns, who benefits, but maybe much more importantly, who creates? What are the shared values by which we envision what's possible? When I think back to these people that I've met all over the world, yes, they often enter into this space with a combination of fear and curiosity. They're worried about what AI means because they've seen what the last 40 years of digital development has meant for them. But it's always balanced by a curiosity and interest, a hope that this time might be different, that we might be able to do something with AI that actually lifts up the interests of single voices, of communities, of meaningful participation. So I'll end on this. If we're going to do that, it's not business as usual. There's no way we can do the same things we've done for the last 40 years and assume a new outcome. I think what it requires of us is something that we're seeing flowering across the world in 2025. Traditional institutions coming forward with new approaches, bringing together multi-sectoral participation, thinking about new ways that we think about the fundamentals of economics and market-based solutions to say, how do we tie these, again, with a view to a shared aspiration? I think the AI Action Summit will be a big part of that in 2025. I'm super excited to be here and to be a part of that as well.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vilas, for that testimony. Now, let me turn to Martin to finish that first half of our panel. Martin is a long-time friend of the forum. He's the CEO of AI Collaborative, which was formed by the Omidyar group, and more to the point, after a long career in NGOs, and in particular creating the Open Government Partnership that many of you will probably know, the OGP, along the US, the Obama White House, and Brazil, I remember. Martin, more to the point, is one of the thematic envoys to the AI Action Summit of February, and he oversees one of the 5 main themes, which is on public interest AI. So Martin, can you walk us along the thoughts, I would say, of what is being prepared for the AI Action Summit, and in which direction will you answer that call for trying to put a floor under the AI divide?
Sure. Thank you. Thanks, Justin. One of the most interesting meetings I attended in the field of AI over the past few months was a meeting that we helped organize about 6 months after the launch of ChatGPT. And one of the experts in the meeting said something that in some ways sounds quite wonky, but I think afterwards was very powerful, which was, he said, look, the main thing you need to do is to ensure that AI is outcomes-based. And effectively, and I've come to understand it as meaning, whatever you do, ensure that the technology is serving societal needs, and it's societal needs that's the driver. And in a way, it sounds painfully obvious. But I think, starting where Minister Barrot started, that's exactly what we failed to do in the last wave of technology. I think I would be hard-pressed to find many people that say that the lesson from the social media age was that we used social media really to respond to societal needs. I think we were far too driven by the technology's own dynamics and incentives rather than by societal incentives. So that's our starting point. Then the question is, what are the problems that we face? Public interest AI work, there's no lack of projects. The problem is fragmentation. There's a lot of good projects, but they're not talking to each other. Companies are vertically integrated for a reason. That's one problem. The second one, and many of you have spoken about this today, is the question of the lack of availability of high-quality data. I want to come back to this. The third one is one that we haven't spoken about so much, and that's openness. I believe strongly, I set up Open Government Partnership, innovation flourishes in the open. We need to be much clearer and much more bullish in a defense of openness in artificial intelligence, including but not limited to open source. And so here, I think there's a lot of opportunities, and I'm very optimistic about it. The first one is we have a huge amount of very exciting work when it comes to openness in AI. Some of it's led by Europe, some of it's led by the South. There are a number of different actors that we'll be bringing together. The second one is we have the data. I mean, we should talk about this at more length if we have the time. The data exists. We have to be able to crack this issue of being able to collectively use that data, and I'll come to health data in a second, all the while respecting privacy concerns. We haven't done this as a global community so far. We have to do it. That accounts for environmental data, health data, and others. And the third one, we've spoken a little bit less about, we think is really important, is the climate footprint of AI. And here, we see this as obviously a threat, but also an opportunity. We think it's up to us to create more innovative, in some cases smaller, and more frugal AI models. So for the summit, and we'd love your help and support and feedback, the way we're thinking about this, and the question we've been asking ourselves are, what are the critical, realistically, what are the critical bricks that we need to build together to build the foundations, the infrastructure for public interest AI? And we see those as fourfold. And I've hinted at them earlier. The first one is openness. We want to build from the ground up the tools and standards that drive the global adoption of openness in AI, really practical tools. So what are the open source tools for trust and safety in artificial intelligence? What does that look like? How can we drive them forward? Number two, on the data side, we're looking for all your help. We're working with a number of different actors to build these data banks, data trusts in specific areas. We need the data. There are certain areas we don't. There are certain areas we're desperate for the data. Leading cancer researchers will tell you they have never seen so much complexity with so little data. We need patients' genetic information with longitudinal health data gathered throughout their treatment and their lives. We don't have it now. We can do it, and we need to do it. So that's the second brick. So openness, data. The third brick is, from a public interest perspective, we're very interested and focused on smaller models. We want to provide the incentives for the research, the development, and access to smaller models that are finely tuned to societal needs. That's the third brick. The fourth brick, many of you have hinted at it and spoken about it directly, is the question of participation and agency. It's core to what Vilas was talking about, and effectively accountability. In order to succeed, we need the critical feedback loops with those most affected people so they can tell us, and they can be in the driver's seat, what's working, what's not working. So students as well as teachers, patients as well as doctors. So this is the job that we're setting out to do. It's 11 working weeks from now until February 10th. And one of the main deliverables we're working on is the setup of a dynamic global platform and incubator that will work to spin up these new initiatives and then spin them back out under the aegis of this overall umbrella where we can unite around a definition of a shared framework as to what we mean by public interest AI, so we can finally work together and fight this fragmentation that has bedeviled our field. So I'm optimistic that together we can build the foundations for a resilient, open approach to public AI and look forward to working with you on it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. I think we can applaud our first panel. And I will now ask the second shift to come on board. We're going to continue and focus on what the industry does. On peut retirer un siège. Thank you. And for that, I will join you. Chris, could you come here? I will come actually in the here. Perfect. Yes, and Keith. Yes. I'm getting tired, so I will be sitting as well. Yes. I think I'm allowed to do that. So the conversation continues, and for the second shift, for this second part of the panel, I wanted to ask a number of companies to tell us how they view this issue. What are their actions, especially in Africa, because Africa was the focus of the first part of the panel, and elsewhere, but also a view from a foundation that has been active on the ground, developing programs, and what lessons they have held from that. I will first call on Chris. Chris is a longtime friend of the forum as well. Chris is the VP for the UN and international organization wing of Microsoft, and so you're sort of a diplomat for Microsoft. One could describe you like that. You lead the work engaging the UN and other international organizations. Before that, you held senior roles in the UK government, including here in Paris. You're also a good friend of Paris as UK ambassador to the OECD. So, seen from your window, Chris, what are the actions that companies like Microsoft can take to democratize access and to try to get some more equal access to AI?
Well, you've read most of my CV out there, Justin, so I may as well complete it. The very first job I did was a filing clerk in a printers. I was a filing clerk in a printers in a town called Reading in the UK, and I worked for paperback printers. And this was a very old company. It was 300 years old. Over the course of its history, it produced all of the paperwork that drove the East India Company. It produced the timetables for the Great Western Railway, which drove much of southern England's industrial development. And at some point, it published Lady Chatterley's Lover, which some of you might have read as well. Why do I tell this story? I tell this story because the UK did not invent the printing press. The UK did not invent the printing press, but the UK, over the course of its history, in the company that I worked in anyway, found many ways to use that technology to drive its own industrial development. And that's because the printing press was a general purpose technology, and the revolution that we saw with Gutenberg's invention, really changed the world. And in Microsoft, we consider that artificial intelligence is comparable. It's a general purpose technology like the printing press, like electricity, which has far-reaching, consequential implications for the way the economy and society is going to change. And what we see when we look at the history of the adoption of technologies like this is that some countries are able to move quickly and adopt them and diffuse them through their economies, and other countries are less quick. The Netherlands famously had more printing presses in it than Germany just a few decades after the invention. So then, what do we take from this? We take that a really concerted, deliberate approach to the diffusion of the technology is important, and then we immediately hit the buffers of the structural challenges that the Global South faces in adoption of the technology. So, thanks to the good work of Amandeep and others in New York, we've got a consensus view that this technology can be helpful. How do we put it to use? Look, I'm going to try and be brief, and I'll make 3 points. First of all, we've got 2.7 billion people not connected to the internet. We've got 700 million people without electricity. 140 years after the first building in New York was electrified. We've got to learn the lessons of previous technologies. Now, Microsoft is playing its part in the 2.7 billion. We've got a program called Airband, which is going to connect 250 million people, of which 100 million are in Africa by the end of 2025. But clearly, that's only going to get us so far. The comment was made earlier that infrastructure is the #1 challenge. And of course, when we consider infrastructure, we're talking about data centers. Now, data center investment, as you'll have seen, as you look at the reports and the quarterly reports coming out of companies like ours, the spending on data centers is very, very significant indeed. I'm sure if you add up, what Microsoft and AWS are doing, you quite quickly get to something like 100 billion. You add Google, a couple of other companies in there as well. Tens of billions of dollars being spent on this investment. Now, we are making some investment in the Global South. I can point to $7.7 billion of investment going into countries like Indonesia, Brazil. The country that I would particularly pick up on, though, because I think it's illustrative of a couple of points, is Kenya. Now, we did announce that we were going to be investing $1.5 billion in Kenya to build data center infrastructure that would actually serve the East African region. And why am I thinking about a regional perspective? Well, I think it's important that we acknowledge that the business case for this investment Like, it's a lot of money to be spending, and the business case, has to be made. It has to be economically viable for private capital on its own to come in and make this level of investment. One thing which is very interesting in East Africa, and I think this may be something for us to think about, is that, the policy, the governance, the institutional framework that you need to have in a region to allow data to flow across a region between countries so you can get an aggregation of the demand to justify investment like ours in Kenya, that is work that I think we could really, really look at. The East Africa community is doing some work in that regard. But the other interesting thing about the Kenya investment is that we did it in partnership with the UAE AI company G42. And I think you'll start to see more and more different pools of capital starting to be mobilized, I would hope, to build out some of this infrastructure. In the end, as I say, private money will only go so far. We need to find some way to look at public-private partnership. We need to try and find some way to look at the way that the development and financing institutions can also be brought to bear on this challenge. I'll stop there, Justin, but I've got more to say if you want later.
I hope to be able to come back to the four of you. But let me first turn to Tanuja. Tanuja Randeri is the Managing Director, EMEA, for Amazon Web Services, for AWS. She comes after a very strong career including with McKinsey and Schneider Electric. For those interested, she also hosts a podcast, Power Women Speak, that you can listen to on what it takes for women to be successful in the business environment. And so, Tanuja, tell us about the view from AWS, which is one of the major actors in this field. What does it take to democratize access to AI? What are the tools that are necessary? Chris was speaking about public-private partnerships. How do you see this question, and what can be done by business?
Oh, thank you, and Chris, good to hear from you. I think lots of common perspectives there. It's wonderful to be here, particularly today, in something called the Peace Forum on Remembrance Day. So I just want to thank everyone for all the time that you've spent taking out thinking about the people that fought for us. But let me just get started. I think Europe is sitting on the brink of an unprecedented opportunity. And it's wonderful to be here to talk about how we're going to harness the power of this technology. I mean, this technology, generative AI is not new, right? We've been working with AI for 25 years. But generative AI is particularly new because it has the power to augment, accelerate, and automate almost every process and every value chain in any sector. And what's exciting to see is that the adoption and uptake we've seen, by the way, in Europe of AI is actually really positive, both from the public broadly, but also in businesses. We've seen about a 30% increase, by the way, just in the past year alone. And if I do the math on that uptake, I would say to you that there's 600 billion euros to be unlocked just by this technology alone. When you build on cloud and digital technologies, that's 3.2 trillion euros of productivity to be unlocked. And we all know that Europe needs innovation, productivity, talent to be building to the next level, and of course addressing climate change. So there's a real need, and I think there's a real opportunity which gets us very excited. We're super committed, by the way, to this idea and concept and importance of inclusive and democratizing access to these technologies. We've been doing it with the cloud, and we intend to do it absolutely with AI. And let me tell you about how we're doing this. So the first, and our previous panel talked about this at length, actually. The first is infrastructure. Chris also mentioned about this. We've been investing in Europe since 2010, and by now we've already invested 150 billion euros. So Chris, pretty much on the money, but that's just us, right, over the past, 13 or 14 years. And if you look at the investments, it's not only in France, where we've done 6 billion, and in Spain, and recently announced the European Sovereign Cloud, but actually Africa is very dear and near to my heart. I grew up in India. I oversee our Africa region, and in Africa we've invested about 2.5 billion in local infrastructure, both in South Africa, but also in Kenya and Nigeria, and will continue to do so. The second big thing, though, we talk about technology and infrastructure, but the most important problem that we face is skills. And I think Karim talked about this briefly, but digital skills is critical. Most of you tell us you don't have the skills to be able to harness this technology. So what good is infrastructure going to do if we don't have skills? So we've been fully committed to training people for free around the world. I'm really excited that we passed 31 million learners this past year, actually. So 31 million learners trained for free by us, hundreds of millions of dollars of investment, but also very recently an investment in AI Ready. And then in South Africa, I personally was there to open our Cape Town Skills Center, which is super exciting because it's really serving the underserved community and the underemployed. And we've trained 20,000 people just coming off the street and coming in to do training, and almost 300,000 across sub-Saharan Africa. And so skills, skills, skills. If there's one thing we need to partner on, it's that. And we sit in a place like France where academic and investment in that has been really, really strong. I think the third big one, and the minister brought this up, by the way, in the 3 failures that he mentioned. He talked about competition. I look at that in the form of choice. It needs to be that we provide choice to you. And so we've been very invested in ensuring that the generative AI solution that we bring to the market, Amazon Bedrock, is based on choice. You can access any model. We don't believe in one model. That's not going to win the world. Someone spoke about, I think it was Vishal talking about small models. We also have the ability for you to bring your own. So you need choice. You need a very secure platform. Responsibility on security is not just ours. It's all of ours, actually. Data security is key. And you really need a platform that has the lowest cost when it comes to chips. And I'm sure we'll get onto that in a moment in performance. And then finally, the minister also talked about this. Inclusion is so critical. Human rights are so critical. We're very committed to responsible AI, by the way. What does that mean? It means ensuring you have the tools to have guardrails so that when you are working with AI, you're working responsibly, and to make sure that we are mitigating gender bias, which is really, really critical for us to do. The data sets need to be right. And we need to have large language models in local language. So those are the 4 big things. I will tell you that regulation needs to be there. It's super important. We believe in it, but it needs to be innovation friendly, which is really critical. And I'll leave you with one example that is very special to me. Huron AI, I don't know if you know them, but in Kenya, they're using our solutions and theirs to bring cancer care across Kenya. There are only 15 oncologists in Rwanda, 15. That means for every oncologist, it's 3,200 possible patients. In the US, it's 1 to 300. So Huron AI is changing the way people are getting cancer treatment with mobile and remotely. Thank you for that. I could go on forever as well, but I'm very excited about what the future holds and excited to be here.
Thank you, Tanuja. Chris, do you want to add something?
I don't know if my mic's still working. I just want to double down on something that you just said, which is this question of choice. And I think that, you know, a conversation we have to have, and hopefully we can start to have it when the infrastructure build starts happening, is around what an ecosystem of creation actually looks like within the Global South, within Africa. I think that establishing choice around which models you can access, but also making sure that any data which is created and you know, much will be created, can also be put to the service of that local ecosystem as well. So I think this question of choice is really important. That's where innovation and competition ultimately comes from.
Thank you. Let me now turn to Brad. Brad, you've been running the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation program on AI. You've been overseeing that after being the lead person on global access to COVID tools 4 years ago. And I'm mentioning this because there are indeed similarities in the way, I mean, it's an interesting model, the question of how do we bring vaccines everywhere and get equal access to vaccines compared with how do we bring AI equally around the world. And so I guess this experience must have been useful. But what I'm interested in your experience is the fact that the Gates Foundation has been, to my knowledge, the only one to run a large-scale program to bring AI to various countries in Africa, for that matter. And I'd like to know what exactly you learned from that experience, what lessons you took, and how it can inform the drive to the AI Action Summit in February.
Yeah, thanks, Justin. It's a great pleasure to be here, and coming as the policy lead for a lot of our work on applied AI, it's a great honor to represent a broad group of folks at the Foundation who are looking at this. And it's important to know where the Gates Foundation is coming from when it comes to our engagement on AI. Our work on AI and our work on generative AI is focused on how we can harness this technology and these opportunities to support scalable solutions for global health and development for the populations that we aim to serve, largely in low and lower middle income countries. So it is a means to accelerate an ends, as Vilas so eloquently alluded to earlier. And that is how we're trying to think about it. So, I come out of health advocacy, so I've been on a quite steep, if quite fascinating, learning curve on AI for the past year and a half. And inspired by the potential and the excitement, but also that need to learn, one approach we took is that last year, 2023, which feels like a lifetime ago when it comes to generative AI, our foundation launched a Grand Challenges RFP seeking researchers and innovators from LMICs who are looking at how to tackle some of these challenges in health, in agriculture, and financial inclusion. So we launched a Grand Challenges call for proposals. In 2 weeks, we got 1,300 applications, which is the most we'd ever seen for one of those calls for proposals. And we ended up awarding 50 awards to proof of concept efforts in 18 countries: health, education, agriculture, financial inclusion. And this effort also spurred a follow-on effort by our funding partners in Africa and in Grand Challenges Brazil to invest in another round of 50 proposals. So ultimately, our goal is impact and scale, and we want to avoid what we, at least in the global health space, often call pilotitis. So we want to move from proof of concept to actual scale and impact. Now, 33% of that first cohort did receive follow-on funding. So we're really excited about the actual potential for impact here, and we're continuing to invest in lots of other areas about this. But what's also really important is what those grantees, as we've been following them, have been telling us about what they're seeing and what the bottlenecks are. So I actually mostly want to just read off what we've heard from them. A lot of it is somewhat of a repetition of what Kate and Kareem spoke to earlier, but I think it's really important, which is why I do want to repeat it. So one is a barrier around access to affordable, high-performance computing. I mean, we've heard this challenge, it comes up a lot in AI, but in the areas we're focused on, there's almost a dual market failure where we're trying to support innovation in and for LMICs, but we're also trying to support innovation within that space that can reach and support the needs of the most vulnerable populations. So how do we target compute capacity for those specific use cases? There's also the scarcity of local data. Again, it's been alluded to. We need more digitized, high quality, and locally relevant data sets. In the health space, less than 3% of PubMed data is focused on the African context. And so if we want to support health tools for Africa, we need to increase those data sets if we want to make sure they're accurate and, of course, that they're culturally applicable. Diversity of language and culture. If less than 0.1% of online content is in African languages, where 55% is in English, then we need to invest in the multilingual models that will make sure that these tools are accessible, but that is resource intensive. That does require investment. Limited early stage and scaling funding. AI startups that we've been working with, because we have been investing in some private sector partners, face particular difficulties securing the critical finance in the under $250,000 range, but also the higher ranges. So if we want to both test proof of concept, but also reach scale, we need to be able to invest particularly in sectors like health, education, and agriculture. Talent and AI literacy, we've already heard about that one, but this goes across talent that's actually innovating, policymakers, and also end users that need to be able to access these tools. It's one of the reasons we're starting to look a lot at tools that use voice instead of text so that we can break through literacy gaps. Bias and cultural sensitivity. I mean, practically speaking, this means that the tools that we're trying to support often require careful customization, rigorous testing, strong evaluation, because we want to ensure they're not only impactful but relevant and avoid perpetuating harmful stereotypes. And then ethical design and safety. Our partners found that ethical trade-offs could occasionally be necessary, if only because there are limited regulatory frameworks in the areas that we're focused on, so there's not a lot of guidance in how do you balance privacy, transparency, and accessibility. So we're very excited about the potential for AI, but a couple of lessons I would draw from this, particularly for the Action Summit. One is, as Kate said earlier, we need to make sure that the partners we're listening to are the types of partners we're also bringing to these forums to make sure we're hearing directly from the innovators that we're working with. But we also recognize that no one partner can do this alone. We have to tackle that fragmentation challenge that Martin alluded to earlier as well. So last year, we also partnered with a group of funders, particularly in this case USAID, FCDO, GIZ and BMZ in Germany, and IDRC in Canada, to launch what we've called ourselves as the AI for Development Funders Collaborative. And we want to better coordinate how we're investing, not necessarily do a lot of pooled investing, but align our funding, avoid duplication, avoid fragmentation. And we've been in touch with our colleagues in France. We've been trying to bring in other funders from other philanthropies. And one opportunity, certainly for the Paris Summit, is to continue to bring those communities like that together and make sure that we're not duplicating efforts, particularly in the areas we're working on, where we need more resources and we need to make sure they go as far as possible. So we at the Gates Foundation very much look forward to partnering with all of you out there, as we head to the Paris Action Summit and beyond.
Wonderful. Thank you, Brad. That's very refreshing to have the sort of real-life experience of direct support. Last but not least, Keith, I wanted to end with you because you bring a very peculiar perspective, which we're not necessarily used to, which is that from the sort of hardware part of the industry, because you've worked for many years at NVIDIA, the leader in GPU chips, and you now joined AMD as Senior Vice President for Global AI Markets. But that's not the only reason why I asked you to come on that panel. It's also because you've been, throughout your career, also doing policy work, especially here at the OECD. And so you've been coming to Paris quite a bit. And so you have a policy that is both, a vision that is both informed by your corporate work, but also by your policy work. And so tell us, seen from the hardware company, one of the leading ones, how this looks and how we can ensure better global access.
Thank you, Justin. Well, I have the unenviable position of being the 9th speaker in a 90-minute panel. So I wonder if we should stop and do a stretch, or what should we do? Should we just pile through? So let's just finish it off?
You have 20 minutes.
No, yeah, exactly. No, I would not do that to you. Thank you for bearing with us, because there's obviously such a great panel and such great speakers. And I want to try if I can add a little more flavor to some of these topics, but try not to repeat things that were already said. The minister opened up today by talking about failures, and then some of those we revisited. Let me add some data to some of those that I think is not widely known information. As you pointed out, I'm from the hardware sector, but of course that's just the recent chapter of my life. I spent the first part of my life as a senior partner in the Big Four sector, doing consulting work and being a little more strategic. I didn't step into a data center until 2019, which was about 3 months after I joined NVIDIA. So I haven't spent my whole life in hardware, but what I have learned in the last 5-6 years in this sector, is really kind of eye-opening. Number one, there's this myth, this grand myth, that computing is both infinite and easy, right? Whatever you want, you can just get from the cloud. It just rains from the cloud, right? And there's some truth in that statement. In fact, nothing has democratized access to computing like the public cloud. But there are more than one kind of computing. Computing is not computing, right? There's sort of this classical computing, and then there's high-performance computing, as was discussed today. And high-performance computing, which is not just about hardware, and here's one of the other myths, it's about a specialized stack of hardware and software combined that is the essential infrastructure for AI. And that form of computing is finite and hard, and the finite part is important because we talk about donations and contributions and way to engage the private sector, and this idea of an AI foundation, which we'll talk about more tomorrow in our post meeting, and a lot of it deals with, essentially contributions or those kinds of things to the private sector. But when it comes to hardware, unlike software, it's finite. So if you can only manufacture a certain amount of a product, in today's world, there is more demand than there is supply for these high-performance computers, right? So we cannot meet demand. So the possibility of donations is zero. Zero. Right, so you know there's going to be no GPUs dropped out of airplanes, sprinkling the fields. I mean, it's just not going to happen from anybody, not the first, second, or third manufacturer of these technologies. So realistically, we have to think about how do we break through these access barriers, which are very real. And let me put some data on this because it's really important to go beyond the high level stuff. So in order to create these foundation models, these frontier models, to create these incredible, these almost magical innovations, you need access to the world's biggest computers. There are more than 500 of these machines across the world, but we don't. It's hard to track them, frankly. But there's pretty good data on the top 500, and there's literally a list called the top 500, and it's actually curated by a professor in Germany, believe it or not. But this is the best data available, so it's not the only data, but it's the best data. And if you actually were to look and map that data, what you'll learn is only 34 countries in the planet out of what 195 or 96, whatever the list is, right? Roughly 20% of the world's countries control 100% of the computing for the world, 100%. So the other 160 countries, which of course would include most of Africa, most of Latin America, most of Central Eastern Europe, have zero ability to train a large-scale model. Zero. That means that 100% of the computing in those 20% of those countries will be the net exporters of AI, and the other 160 countries will be net importers of AI. And these are very real numbers. This is today, right? And that number has improved because 5 years ago when I counted it for the first time, it was 29. It went from 29 to 34, so that's an improvement, I guess, over 5 years. Not a huge improvement, but still, of the 34 countries, you can guess where most of the computers sit, which is 2 countries, the US and China, right? That is 50% of the 500. And then, so really what's left is in the other 32 countries. So I give you that data because it is a staggering geopolitical reality when it comes to access to these machines. And even within the wealthiest countries in the world, whether it's France or the United States, there is a have and have not. There are many, many universities who do not have access to computing. The vast majority of universities don't have a supercomputer. I mean, literally, there are 4,000 institutions of higher education in the United States. 25 have a supercomputer. 25 out of 4,000. So there is a so it's a problem that extends both within nations and across nations. But of course, it gets quite severe when you go into the global south. So this is a problem that can be characterized through both lack of access, lack of awareness, lack of governance. There's a lot of these issues that can be addressed, and we need to tackle them when we get together in February. We need to tackle them head on, and we need to be realistic about how to create a private sector partnership that does not lean on just contributions or donations, again, which will go not that far. And we have to think about creative, sustainable models that bring the global south into this economy, because I think the long-term consequences from economic growth and participation and equity will widen much faster than in prior industrial revolutions, which unfolded over decades. This is unfolding over months to years, right? So there's, we don't have generations to figure it out. So I really do appreciate and value the fact that you've brought us together, not just on this panel, but tomorrow and in the planning for this session. AMD is honored to be a part of it. I've personally have spent many years focused on this topic and want to continue to work with all of you in this panel and in the room to figure out this very complex topic. And one last thing is that Vilas rightfully pointed to these narratives that become viral, right? And then we kind of hang on to them. And I think one of the narratives that we've hung on to that's been difficult is an oversimplification of the problem, as if it's just, well, they've had access to GPUs, that'll solve the problem. Access to education, that'll solve the problem. It's not that simple, right? It is much more complex than that. So we have to be okay with a complex narrative and a complex solution, even if it's not politically, it doesn't fit into an elevator pitch. But that is the nature of the problem. So thank you again for bringing us together.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Brad. Absolutely, Tanuja.
Bill, very quickly. First of all, thank you for that. I think that's right. There is no magic bullet, and it's true. Everyone jumps to, I need chips to solve my problem. Something you mentioned, though, that I just wanted to lean in on, and I guess what Kate and Karim brought up, there is a real need in the countries that do not today have, right? Either potentially the compute, or I'd say more importantly, the capability for us to invest in building that vibrant startup ecosystem. And I think that's super, super important that we do that. It's important that we do it in terms of, helping female founders get funding. I mean, I don't know if you know this, but only 10%, right, of founders are really female. And by the way, only 18% of the top AI companies in the world have female leadership, right? That's a real problem. So we need, through with private and public funding, accelerator funding, be able to go invest in that less than 250 range. By the way, we put a 30 million fund in place, by the way, for female founders. It's 225,000 of credits that you get. But I think if we don't lean into that, then we will keep having this. However, if we do lean into that, and the training, and providing the core compute availability through access to cloud services, I actually think there's a lot more innovation coming out of those countries than in the classic sort of north, if we would call it, right? So I'm super excited about that. But yeah, thanks for bringing that up.
Thank you, Tanuja. Chris?
Yeah, I mean, just really quickly, because I think, Keith, when you talk about the number of countries that do not have access, I think that really resonates. I'm sure it does to those of us in a UN context that think about the 193 all the time. But what I'd say is, and I don't know if you agree with this, it's not necessarily that we need to be thinking, how do we build a data center in each and every one of those countries, right? And I think that's sometimes the step that people then mentally take. And that's the point I was trying to make earlier with this East Africa Regional Data Zone. If we can get a framework, a regulatory, institutional framework within which data can flow across regions, then a data center in that region can serve that region and the countries within it. But you need to do that hard policy work. And of course, to justify the investment, you've got to have the demand. And there's a couple of things we could do to stimulate that demand. For the public sector to start, increasing adoption, moving into adoption, that's one thing. And exactly as someone said, encouraging entrepreneurs and SMEs, then we'll get the use cases that the money will follow.
Thank you. One last point, we're almost finished with the panel, but there's something that tickles me, and it's the issue of languages. Brad, could you get back to that question and perhaps explain to us more concretely what was done in terms of languages? Because for many of us, AI seems this sort of magic wand that will just assimilate one language as long as there are data sets to do it, and then we'll be able to sort of produce articulated language, at least. Could you tell us more how you work with, especially in Africa, with various languages and how we can...
Yeah, and I think a lot of it does come down to that question of data and data sets. Again, if we want to make sure that not only are the tools being created in ways that are representative, but also they can actually be useful to populations that are predominantly speaking local languages, we need to be able to make sure that there is simply large amounts of data in those languages available. And it was interesting, I mean, I'm no expert on this, but in some of the conversations I've heard just in the last couple of days, talking about the potential marriage of the need for this with actual cultural efforts to be able to preserve and capture indigenous languages and make sure we're supporting the cultural aspects. So we've been investing in a number of smaller scale projects so far that are mostly just focused on recording large amounts of voice data, 10,000 hours plus, just so we can be able to reach sort of a critical mass that allow us to support tools in these languages. And we're hoping through this Funders Collaborative I referenced, through other partnerships, and I know that others in this room are investing in this space as well, to be able to keep building on that sort of languages data corpus and hopefully do it in a way that's relatively aligned so we're not duplicating a lot of these efforts, but try to capture as many languages as possible. And I actually think it's in everyone's interest, in every country's interest, to be supporting this work, because not only does it make the tools more accessible for the use cases, but it also, I mean, frankly, gives us a competitive advantage because we can reach more customers. And so we're hoping to do that from the public interest perspective, but I imagine everyone here is hopefully interested in doing that as well.
Thank you. So I actually would love to continue, but we can't because we're already late. So in conclusion, I think we have gathered lots of very useful thoughts from the first panel, which I want to thank again, and from the second half of the panel on understanding what can be done at the AI Action Summit in February in terms of not simplifying complex issues, not thinking that compute power, however necessary it is, and it's a finite resource, in your words, Keith, needs to be complemented by work on data sets, on advice, on talent, on creating local infrastructure of AI, and that probably will take these lessons to heart in the next few weeks, building up on those to elaborate, as we say in the jargon, policy deliverables for the AI Action Summit. In the meantime, please join me in thanking the first panel and the second panel for an excellent discussion on this important topic. Thank you. Thanks.